to the show. This the MMA fortune teller. Yeah.
The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.
What is up, you guys? Teller checking in for some late night talk. First and foremost, sorry that there was no content coming to you guys earlier in the week since we had the big UFC 278 fight card. Unfortunately, I did have some real life type situations come up. It did prevent me from hopping on the mic. And also, I was not able to get that Dana White's Contender Series prediction video out to you guys. But maybe it's better that I didn't, because that was a rough card to predict. As you guys saw, a lot of underdogs did come through. And but in all seriousness, I just was not able to get that video up to you guys. I was not able to pump out the recap of UFC 278 to you guys. But I am here now, and whatever was going on is put behind. So we're here and we're ready to go moving forward. I'm making this video. I'm actually excited to talk about what I'm going to be talking about here. I want to talk about who is the greatest UFC welterweight, and let's just be frank, the greatest welterweight in mixed martial arts history. And this is a conversation that has been talked about for years. Of course, it has been between Kamaru Usman and George St.Peirre. Obviously, for those of you guys that know me, I felt the answer was pretty clear, even going into Saturday night. Now, if Usman was able to pull the victory off, he was going to start to inch his way closer to the resume that George St. Peirre possesses. But I've been very clear that I think that George St. Peirre is without a doubt the top of the mountain in the welterweight division. And I just want to go over a couple accolades here, and I want to also talk about some things that Usman has done that has been amazing as well. But I definitely want to get feedback from you guys. You guys let me know, who do you think is the greatest welterweight of all time? Is it Usman? Is it George St. Peirre? Or is it somebody else? I think if we're being realistic, it's between the two men. And I think if we're being realistic, it's George St. Peirre. A couple numbers I want to run by you guys. UFC victories, straight up victories inside of the octagon. George St. Peirre, 20 victories inside the octagon, while Kamaru Usman has won 15 bouts. So up until this point in time, George St. Peirre has 5 more victories. Of course, Usman still has some more time left to go. He's not retired. George St. Peirre is retired. We'll never see him fight again. So Usman does have some time to catch up to him there. UFC title defenses, George St. Peirre 9, with Kamaru Usman at 5. So Usman still has to retain his belt back, and then he has to defend it at least 4 more times to hit even with George St. Peirre in that department there. UFC victories via finish, whether that's submission, TKO, KO. Some of you guys might find this interesting. George St. Peirre, not really known as a finisher. George St. Peirre, 6 finishes inside the octagon, while Kamaru Usman only has 5. So GSP tops him there. I think that's an interesting one, because a lot of people like to refer to GSP as kind of a decision type of fighter, but he had a couple finishes, obviously some of them more towards the beginning half of his career. Of course, the last fight that he had inside the octagon, his last fight ever against Michael Bisping, he was able to get a finish. Now, how about UFC championship victories? And I'll clarify what I mean when I say this, but GSP at 13, while Kamaru Usman only at 6. We're talking about championship victories. Now, of course, you're not defending the belt when you're fighting for the belt. GSP, in his last fight, fought in a championship bout, winning the middleweight championship of the world. Of course, GSP did lose the title at one point in time. He had to redeem himself there. He also fought for the interim title with Matt Hughes. But in those championship fights, he came through 13 times. Those are the big time fights there. And while Kamaru Usman has only won 6 championship fights. Now, you could also say, well, GSP lost the belt, therefore he had an opportunity to win another championship fight there. Even if he didn't lose the belt in the first place, his next fight would have been a championship fight. And if you want to talk about those 2 losses that were on George St. Peirre's resume, of course, the Matt Hughes loss that he had early in his career, where he was fighting a Hall of Famer, where Matt Hughes He had the leg up in that fight. Matt Hughes had a lot of experience. GSP still a young buck at the time, and of course Matt Hughes caught him in that armbar. Well, how about the fact that George St. Pierre came through and got redemption, not once, right, but 2 times, as he went out there, pulled off an armbar himself the last time around, and then that middle fight also hit him with that head kick, followed him down to the mat, finished him up there. So got redemption twice against Matt Hughes there. And then, of course, he did get clipped against Matt Serra. Some would say in similar fashion to the extent of what just happened with Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. A little bit of a fluke situation. The fighter that shouldn't have necessarily won the fight won the fight. GSP went out there and already got his redemption. He went in there, brutalized Matt Serra, bullied him, beat him down, took his belt back. Now, I will say this, Kamaru Usman did not get his opportunity for that redemption at this point in time, and he also does already have a victory over Leon Edwards, so we got to give him credit for that victory that he already has there. And I think that Kamaru Usman, let me be clear, I think that Kamaru Usman is going to go out there and get his redemption in this rematch. I want to tell you guys that now. I think Kamaru Usman is going to go out there and really put on a clinic on Leon Edwards. I think he's going to be the most motivated that he's ever been. And I think, if we're being honest, Kamaru Usman was handling that fight before he just made one mistake. So Usman will get redemption there, in my opinion, just so you guys know my early thoughts there. Let's also take note that the only 2 men to have ever defeated George St. Pierre, of course, again, he had the redemption against them, but we're talking about Hall of Fame caliber fighters. Now, Matt Serra, Matt Serra, he was a solid fighter, but I'm not going to sit here raving about the abilities that Matt Serra possesses. He had a big overhand right. He had the jiu-jitsu skills. He was an undersized fighter. He really shouldn't have been fighting at welterweight. He ate too much pasta and pizza and whatnot, in my opinion. He's a little bit stocky. Should have really trimmed himself out and have been fighting down at the lightweight division, in my opinion. But a solid fighter, at least when you compare him to one of the losses of a Kamaru Usman, who lost to Alex Caceres' brother. He got choked out early in his career, a guy that was just not on the level in the least. A guy that was dreaming about making it to the UFC, never even had that opportunity, has a really unimpressive resume. And that was a guy that went out there and choked out Usman. And then again, back to George St. Pierre, the other man to defeat him, Matt Hughes, one of the greatest welterweights of all time. He's right here in the argument of being one of the greatest welterweights of all time. And again, one more time, GSP went out there, got redemption twice, and defeated him in the same way that he lost to him. So again, and over to Kamaru Usman, lost to a no-name fighter, and then the loss to Leon Edwards, which you guys know I'm putting respect on Leon Edwards' name these days after that upset he just pulled off. And already with the resume that he had before that fight, Leon Edwards has been going out there just putting in work for a long time now. So, but you got to give the edge to GSP there and his 2 losses compared to Kamaru Usman's 2 losses. Victories over UFC champions. And when I say over UFC champions, I'm talking about a fighter that was a UFC champion at any point in their career. If either fighter had ever had a victory over one of those caliber of fighters, Kamaru Usman, 3 victories over UFC champions. Of course, you can count Leon Edwards because he had that victory over Leon Edwards early in his career. Leon Edwards is a UFC champion fighter, and I don't just mean currently. That is written in history. He is a champion fighter. Okay, so the victory over Leon Edwards. He has a victory over Tyron Woodley. And then he also has a victory over, let's see here, Rafael Dos Anjos, of course, the lightweight champion of the world. So depending if you want to nitpick or whatnot, but RDA really a lightweight fighter, but did have some success at welterweight, but was undersized against the higher level welterweight fighters like Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, and those types of guys. So we said 3 victories over UFC championship caliber fighters. Well, George St. Pierre had 7 victories over UFC championship fighters. And we can go through the list real quick if you guys are curious to know. Starting off with his victory over Sean Shirk. Believe it or not, yes, Sean Shirk was a UFC champion. I believe he won that vacant lightweight title. So again, we're talking about a guy that was more of a natural lightweight fighter. Sean Shirk really was probably more of a natural bantamweight fighter, if you guys remember him. The Muscle Shark. He was just so roided out that he juiced himself all the way up to these upper weight classes. That guy was really something else. But that was a championship a victory over a championship caliber opponent. Victory over BJ Penn the first time around, victory over Matt Hughes as he got redemption, victory over Matt Hughes once again, victory over Matt Serra getting that redemption. Of course, Matt Serra being a champion because he took the title from GSP. Victory over BJ Penn once again, and then a victory over none other than your guy's favorite fighter, Michael Bisping. Of course, that being a victory over a championship caliber opponent. So, I think that does hold some weight. We're talking about some legends there, fighters that reached the pinnacle of the sport. And then how many weight classes have either of these fighters been a champion in? GSP has been a champion in 2 weight classes, while Kamaru Usman's only been a champion in 1. Now, of course, it's a little bit more difficult for Kamaru Usman. If you want to believe that, supposedly him and Israel Adesanya are such good friends that he didn't want to bump up in weight and give himself that challenge. I call a little bit BS on that. I don't know if you saw the video of Izzy reacting to Kamaru Usman getting knocked out. That wasn't the best acting, in my opinion. I think that he needs to take some acting lessons because he really didn't seem to care that much, in my opinion. He was holding his painted nails over his mouth, and he looked like he was in shock there for a second. You see a little bit of a grimace, a little bit of a smirk, kind of feeling the excitement of the moment. You could just tell that he really doesn't care that much, if we're being honest. That's my opinion. I think that Kamaru Usman should have stepped up by now and have made a run for the middleweight championship. I think that's a fight that he could take. In fact, I would take Kamaru Usman over Israel Adesanya all day. Comment below who you taking in that fight. That's an interesting topic. I'm sure some of you guys will disagree with me, but I think Usman would be able to use his wrestling to get the job done there. And I get it though. Usman does have a lot of accolades in the welterweight division that he's still chasing, as he's chasing GSP, as he wants to be known as the greatest welterweight of all time. So sticking around in the weight class, handling business and putting in work, and I respect it. But I do believe that there's not really much of an argument at this point in time. George St. Pierre is the greatest welterweight champion to ever do it. Usman still has some time left. Usman right now, if you guys don't realize, Kamaru Usman is 35 years old. So, it's right around the age that George St. Pierre retired at, right? I believe George St. Pierre retired right around this age. Came back at that fight with Bisping, but this was around the time that he was hanging them up. Now, I don't think that we should expect Kamaru Usman to be hanging them up anytime soon. Seems like he's still in love with the sport. He's a true competitor. But you have to wonder how this knockout is going to affect him. We'll see how he comes back in the rematch. I saw a video with Khabib Nurmagomedov stating that this knockout and these types of knockouts really do a lot of damage to fighters' careers. And sometimes they're just not the same. So we'll see how Usman comes back. We'll see how the chin holds up. I will say this. I want to say this before we kind of wind down this video. I've gained a lot of respect for Usman. The way that he handled this loss is the type of way that I like to see a fighter handle a loss like this. He's a G. He really is. He's a gangster. You see him. He has the smirk. He manned up. He stood up in the cage, took that L, made the walk. He's posting on Instagram Live. He's helping his daughter do her homework and whatnot. He's joking a little bit. And he's licking his chops for the rematch. He's going to come out strong. He's going to get that victory. And I will say this, Usman has grown on me. I became a little bit of a fan of his, a little bit more of a fan of his than I was in the past. There's some things that he does at times I'm not really crazy about, but it's, he has a little bit of a corny arrogance to him at times, but he's a cool dude. If we're being honest, Usman's a cool dude. And I'm excited to see him get redemption in that rematch. So, and I'm excited to see how far he can continue to push it in the welterweight division as he chases the GOAT of the welterweight division in GSP and one of the GOATs pound for pound in mixed martial arts in George St. Pierre. So if you guys are newer to the sport of MMA and you don't really know what we're talking about here, pay some respect to George St. Pierre. And now I want to also say this real quick. I have a post over on Instagram. Go check my latest post. And we talked in the post is a graphic of a lot of the stuff we talked about today. People want to talk about the fact that George St. Pierre's resume is not as good as Kamaru Usman's because the sport's different and there's a higher level, higher caliber of opponent that Kamaru Usman's facing. I could not disagree with you guys anymore. I mean, can we talk about this here for a second? When you're talking about Kamaru Usman's resume, that's just so stacked, the opponents that he's beat. Okay, first off, I mean, you're talking about in the beginning half of his career. Okay, yes, he had the victory over Leon Edwards. That looks very nice right now as he is the champion, and Leon Edwards is a solid fighter. He's put together a nice resume himself. Other than that, you're talking about a Sean Strickland victory. Sean Strickland, okay, I mean, he's a good fighter. Sliding through all this. RDA, who's really a lightweight fighter. Okay, Tyron Woodley, who you saw the way that Woodley's career went ever since that loss. That we don't know necessarily if he was that type of fighter going into that fight, and Usman just basically took advantage of that, or did Usman break him and take his soul and he was never the same. But Woodley looked absolutely horrible from that fight on. Okay, so I don't know. I put a little bit of an asterisk next to that. But yes, Woodley was a beast in his day. The Colby Covington victories are, of course, very solid victories. Colby Covington is a legit fighter. You guys all know that. Other than that, I got really nothing else to talk about here. Damian Maia was an old man. He rolled out in his wheelchair. You got Jorge Masvidal, who is a extremely overrated fighter. Okay, first off, run the resume on Jorge Masvidal. You know, when Colby's talking about how he is a journeyman, he's not just making something up there. He's not just, you know, talking shit there. He's being real. He is a journeyman to an extent, man. Jorge Masvidal, a crafty fighter, a fighter that really just exploded onto the main stage after landing that flying knee on Ben Askren. Jorge Masvidal really ain't all that. Gilbert Burns is a solid fighter. He has some good jiu-jitsu skills. His striking has really came around these days. He's really a striker these days. It's funny. But you know what? Let me talk about George St. Pierre's resume. First off, I'll compare off the rip a steroided Thiago Alves, which you need to take into consideration. GSP was fighting guys on steroids, and I don't believe GSP ever took steroids. If you see what he looks like right now, he looks almost to be in the same shape that he was when he was fighting, and he's way up there in age. He is a freak of nature. I mean, he takes extreme care of himself. If you keep up to date with GSP, you know that he lives a lifestyle of health, and he has some special genes, in my opinion. So I don't believe he ever took steroids. He was one of the main fighters that was always against it. He was calling for drug testing way back in the day. If you guys didn't remember this, he was the fighter that was complaining. He was the fighter that stepped away for a while because he wanted drug testing implemented in the UFC. He was the one pointing out that he's fighting all these fighters that are on steroids. Okay, these guys were on steroids, and you do have to take that into consideration. You want to talk about, and we'll start at the top and we'll work our way down, but you talk about a Johnny Hendricks that was on the sauce that he was on. That Johnny with the wrestling background and that big old left hand and the roids that he had in his system where he could just go all day. Johnny Hendricks is putting a whooping on almost all those guys that you listed or that we talked about on the list that Kamaru Usman has faced. I'm telling you guys that right now. Look at the shape he was in going into those fights. He was a beast. Nick Diaz, prime Nick Diaz, was coming over from Strikeforce around that time, had a couple fights in UFC. Nick Diaz, do not sleep on the ability that Nick Diaz possessed just because GSP went in there and stifled him. Diaz used to push a pace on fighters like no other, uses his boxing, and he was one of the best welterweights on planet Earth at that time. Carlos Condit. This is Carlos Condit in his prime that he took out. Carlos Condit landed a big kick on GSP too, but GSP got the takedown, settled things down. Carlos Condit, what a diverse fighter. When he was in his prime, he was a stud. Okay, he's better than a Jorge Masvidal, Gilbert Burns, in my opinion. And I know some of you guys are going to think of what you see from Carlos Condit these days. You guys don't know what Carlos Condit was about back in the day, landing that nasty hook on Dan Hardy. Carlos Condit was a savage. Jake Shields, another champion that came into the UFC from major organizations. Remember, back in the day, you had Strikeforce. That was a legit contender with the UFC. We're talking about top talent. A guy like Jake Shields in his prime just wreaked havoc against anybody that he faced against. Solid grappling, and GSP went in there and jabbed his face off. Again, we talked about Thiago Alves. Thiago Alves in his prime, on the juice, nasty Muay Thai striker. Matt Hughes, a Hall of Famer. You go back to one of the more early fights, Matt Hughes, more a better version of himself rather than later on. Of course, in the later fight, he was getting older. Josh Koscheck was a beast. Again, I know you're going to say Tyron Woodley knocked out Koscheck. That was when Koscheck was more at the end of the road. A prime Koscheck was a beast. He had some good wrestling. He had a nasty overhand right. BJ Penn, another fighter, you guys are going to say, oh, look at BJ, give me a break. But back in the day, man, if you guys weren't watching, the sport back then, you got to brush upon it, man. BJ Penn was a savage. Okay, BJ Penn was a savage back in the day. So, in my opinion, and even the Sean Sherk fight, a guy that was on the sauce. I mean, he's fighting guys that were on the sauce, that were extremely talented. And I just think that although the sport has evolved, so if you want to take that with a grain of salt, that the sport has evolved, of course, well, then take GSP and put him into this world. And yeah, he's going to have a little bit more tricks and trades that he's learning in the gym. Of course, the gyms nowadays have more knowledge and whatnot, but I take GSP all day. And now, if you want to talk about if GSP were to face off with the Kamaru Usman, I'll tell you what, man. I think that GSP stuffs any type of takedowns from Kamaru Usman. I think Kamaru Usman stuffs any of GSP's takedowns, and that's tough for me to say because GSP, the most accurate fighter as far as takedowns go in the division, I believe is the most accurate, and I believe he had the most takedowns ever in the division. A guy that wasn't even a wrestler came in, learned wrestling as he started training martial arts, uses Kyokushin karate type of explosion into his takedowns. He used that base into his wrestling. I mean, that just shows you what kind of freak athlete he is. I don't think he's even getting takedowns on Usman. Kamaru Usman, the best takedown defense percentage in the history of the sport as far as defensively. So I'm not going to say he goes in there, rips those takedowns. Maybe he gets one. On the feet, though, I think there's a big chance that Usman would land some big shots and hurt GSP, maybe bust him up a little bit. But I think at the end of the day that GSP would be the more polished striker and his jab would be landing at will. He'd be jabbing Kamaru Usman's nose off. You want to talk about a nice left head kick. GSP had a beautiful left head kick. In fact, I think that's what he hit Matt Hughes with. I mean, there's no telling if he lands that head kick on Usman setting something up, being crafty towards the end of the fight. I mean, all GSP did was win fights. I say GSP would take out Usman, in my opinion. Comment below who you would have in that dream match. Major respect to both fighters. Obviously, I'm a big GSP fan, so some of you guys might feel I'm a little biased. Hopefully, it doesn't rub you guys the wrong way, but I do believe what I'm spitting is facts here. GSP was my favorite fighter of all time, or excuse me, I should say, was my favorite fighter back in the day. Things have changed. Obviously, I didn't like the fact that he retired early, and some things he did just rubbed me the wrong way. But I mean, when I was really getting into the sport when I was young, man, GSP was the fighter that I was really intrigued with and who I gravitated towards. And I watched, get the belt, work his way up to the championship, and just an awesome athlete. And like I said, though, I've gained a lot of respect for Usman, and I'm a big fan of his as well right now. But GSP takes that fight, and GSP is the greatest welterweight of all time. So, all right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this little video I'm putting out here. Please give me some feedback. I definitely want to start pumping out more content to you guys, so you guys can expect me just to be chirping in your ear in these types of videos. If you guys don't like this stuff, you don't got to tune in. You can just catch my breakdown and prediction videos, which I'm going to be working on. Not this upcoming Saturday. Of course, we got no UFC action. I'm not going to be working on a fight for that card because there is no card. But the following Saturday, I'm working on the big Tai Tuivasa and Cyril Gane fight card video. I want to get that up to you guys here quickly. Should be up hopefully by tomorrow. So, another thing too, you guys can expect the quality of these videos to pick up. I'm in the process of getting a green screen and working this all out with my programming, and the videos should look a lot more clean. So you don't got to keep staring at all this Vegas stuff over here. We'll have some real deal backgrounds going on in the back. All right, guys. So leave me some feedback. Hit that like button. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel already, please do subscribe. You get a lot more content coming your guys' way. Signing out. Teller.
Welcome to the show. This is the MMA fortune teller. Yeah.
The MMA fortune teller.
The teller.